Here's exactly how I studied to ace anatomy in PT school. Now in undergrad, my approach was flashcards and that worked super well for me, but in grad school I had to change up a few things because the content was just so much and so fast. So this is exactly what I did. If you don't have an iPad, I would highly recommend. I use Notability and it can be any edition of iPad, but this is a great way to take notes. The main strategy that I used was active recall, and I did that in a couple of different ways. So I was given muscles that I had to memorize in a lecture. I used my own template that I made. I would go and I would fill them all out. You can see here I have a picture, and then I have origin, insertion, action, and innervation. I would go through, fill all of those out using the textbook. That would count as some of my studying for the day. And I would tape them over so I could quiz myself. Whichever ones I would get wrong, I would write on the whiteboard or I would rewrite them in my notes. Another thing that I did is I would go to the whiteboard and I would write out all of the muscles for a certain area of the body, like maybe it's the rotator cuff or the shoulder. I would write them all out. I would look for comparisons and then I would jot those comparisons down in my notes. Like this muscle attaches to the same place as this muscle. These two muscles share the same action, innervation, etc. Again, really looking at everything as a whole and putting the pieces together rather than just strictly memorizing. I'm also very much a visual learner, so if I was struggling a lot with a certain unit, like I did the forearm unit, I would draw out the muscles and I would write out their attachments on there. That way I could really visualize what was going on. These were more so study tools than they were me doing actual active recall. Now, whenever I studied and got something wrong or I just needed, again, another visual, I would use Netter's Atlas. I have the classic regional approach. It is amazing and it's super detailed and has great images of all of the muscles. I would highly recommend getting yourself this. It's mainly what I did for muscles. When it comes to bones, I would screenshot the bones, find pictures online or maybe from my lecture, and I would white out any labels and go through and label them myself. And here's a beautiful example of how I just kind of taped over all of the labels for the bones. Now, when it came to understanding nerves and arteries, I did a lot of, I guess you could call them flow charts or mapping them out. This is the lower limb arterial supply. Again, this is not a static. This is just me starting from the heart and going all the way down to the plantar arteries and mapping everything out. And I would do this repeatedly. Now, for some regions with nerves like the sciatic foramen or maybe the popliteal fossa, I would draw it out, label it. I would do that on the whiteboard as well. For things like other nerves, maybe like the radial nerve where there's a lot of entrapment sites, I would make these cheat sheets. I would write everything out. I would reference it as I studied. The main way I memorized this is I would go on the whiteboard and try to rewrite the entire path myself. I didn't like doing Quizlet for this just because I felt like it was too much information. I preferred to just go to the whiteboard and try to write out the entire path. And I did that for the entire brachial plexus, and then I would do like all the peripheral nerves. A little time consuming, but I do think it's one of the best ways that you will remember it is just by trying to write it from memory. So my active recall for nerves and arteries was less like going through and quizzing myself and more just like, okay, how far can I go rewriting this artery or this nerve path? Anatomy is a lot and it's super overwhelming and you're probably not going to know how to study it right away, but I hope that these tips can help guide you in a certain direction so that you can do well in your exams.